music don't have a color, you know.
Yes, praise God. Yes.
So music is the one thing that crosses every boundary.
Latin, Caribbean, jazz, all of it. So where I come from, music has no color. Right. Dope music is just dope music.
The do is listen to rock. Oh, back then they called it white music. Motherfucking music's technicolor. It don't black and white music. In fact, you meant to hear it, not see it. Fuck it, let's call it blind music. Maybe I took that too far, but I'm here to shake the scene lyrically. I'm here to keep raising the bar till they call it all my music. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello and welcome to this video. Jazz and the history of jazz has always been very fascinating to me since I was a little boy, really, and I first heard it when my dad used to play me the music. I would pick up the Duke Ellington album or Oscar Peterson album, and I would stare at these musicians that my dad was listening to, and from a very early age I had a very strong affinity towards music, and these musicians seemed like gods to me. They seemed like the equivalent of how the normal culture that was around me would talk about Mozart or Beethoven. But to me, I couldn't quite hear it with those, but I could hear it with Oscar Peterson or Duke Ellington, you know, or Dizzy Gillespie, all these musicians that my dad was listening to. And of course, in the 70s, some of these were still alive. And in fact, Oscar Peterson had a TV show where he would come on and talk about jazz.
What were some of the pianos like that you had to play during the early Kansas City days? You mean they weren't boozing there?
Well, I tell you, there were some brutal uprights.
And I remember thinking, what an incredibly intelligent, erudite, funny, and virtuoso musician this guy was, and I felt the warmth and respect he had for what he was doing. It just came across, and it really instilled something in me very strong at a young age. So not only did I start listening to jazz, I started devouring every single encyclopedia I could. I probably read about 20, 30, 40 histories of jazzes through the years. And there was a lot of things about that history that didn't quite add up to me. And we have talked at length about that history on this channel, and I will continue to do so. Now, way before the internet was there, I would talk to my friends or people, to other jazz musicians. They have to understand that where I grew up, there was no jazz. I couldn't get a jazz gig. I couldn't meet jazz musicians. I had to get to a certain age before I could then drive up to the big city, which was Birmingham, which isn't really the centre of jazz. But they had a jam session, and I would queue up and wait to get up and play one Charlie Parker tune or whatever it is and feel very grateful. Because even there was a massive hierarchy within that town, and I was like right down at the bottom. So some guys would be up there playing drums 3 or 4 tunes, but me, I'd be lucky to get up. And, you know, and then when I came into contact with those musicians, my musical interests were wider than just jazz. And if I brought those in to the music in any shape or form. I will give you an actual example of that. I was using a lot of double bass drums, so I get booked on a jazz gig and I'd have my double bass drum pedal, thinking that jazz was this open music where you were free to do what you wanted to do, where you could express yourself within the form and within the rules, but you could express yourself, So if somebody turned up wanting to play jazz, on a tuba, that's quite okay. But for some reason, me turning up with a double bass drum pedal wasn't okay. And wasn't okay to a point where musicians were actually going behind my back and actually getting me sacked from certain gigs. I became aware of that sort of snobbery, elitism within jazz, the pecking order. And I can remember turning up to gigs much later on when I'd got a proper CV and play with multi-million selling artists. You'd turn up and the pianist would turn around to you and go, "Who do you play for?" And I go, "What do you mean? Round here, which jazz musicians do you play with?" And I go, "Well, not really anybody round here." And at that point, you could see they went, "Okay," and then they just demoted you. And then that pianist that I'm talking about on that particular gig then started deriding me on stage. It was quite incredible. He would be playing and then just suddenly stop and then go, "Where are you? Where are you? Oh my God, and you're not listening," and all this type of thing. And deliberately trying to catch me out. In other words, he was an arsehole. And the world's full of arseholes, and in the jazz world, there are arseholes and there are non-arseholes. And that's the way that's true of all humanity. I suppose I could be prejudiced from my early experiences. But the truth was, I was born in a little market town in the UK. I had no way of actually accessing this music I loved. That was it. So what did I do? I listened to the records. I read the history books. History books didn't add up to me. There's a number of things that didn't add up. One of the ones that didn't add up is this idea that Buddy Bolden had sort of invented jazz. How did they know? What did he sound like? What did he actually do? I mean, I'd read, what did he do? Where's the thing that he invented? What was the change? What did it sound like before? He was in jazz groups before he formed his own jazz group. So what jazz were they playing? Was it not jazz? Right? You go to a jazz musician and ask that question, and suddenly it's not just like, "Oh, I don't know." It becomes like, "Oh, you're challenging the narrative." And they get all very upset.
Okay. You are a disgrace to humanity. Get out of this city before I call the police, because that is harassing people.
I did my degree in fine art, which was very, very artsy-fartsy, as you can imagine, and a lot of discussion of aesthetics and philosophy and the history of art and all that type of thing. And it was really influenced, as it is still now, probably even more so now, by postmodernist philosophy, which I took on board because I was being taught it. But there again, the postmodernist philosophy seemed to not quite add up to me. All these things about power dynamics and, a lot of this stuff about everything's created from culture and, the social construct is the only construct and there is nothing else. You discount biology. All these other things that were in postmodernism didn't quite add up to me. Then you live a bit longer. I became a teacher. I did a postgraduate qualification in education where we had to really study the theory behind teaching. And at that point, I came into contact with another group of philosophers.
Hey, so you're a continental philosopher. What's the meaning of life? How do I put this as obscurely as possible? Meaning reveals itself to us qua meaning. Well, what does that mean? You see, even the meaning means. Even the meaning means? Things themselves thing. Things thing? You're just making up verbs. Even nothing nuts. Wait, are you saying that nothing is like a thing and like it performs the action of nothing? It nuts? Or are you saying like a negative, like there is no thing that nuts? Lebenswelt. Geist. You're just saying a bunch of words. Everything is words. Okay.
The fragility part is meant to capture how little it takes to cause white people to erupt in defensiveness. But the impact of that defensiveness, however, is not fragile at all. It functions as a kind of everyday white racial control by making it so difficult for people to challenge us on our unaware assumptions and biases that most of the time they don't. And so it functions to keep everybody in their place and protect the racial hierarchy.
And I start to look at the identity politics, the sort of postmodern philosophy that had underpinned my art training. I start to see there was a fault there. And then putting that back onto jazz history and how that was taught, it became quite abundant to me that what was happening is people today were looking at the history of jazz, not objectively, but through the eyes of a modern postmodernist critical theory, identity politics view of that history, in which the subjugation of Black Americans, the history of slavery, the idea of the Black civil rights movements, and much more so the more extreme ends like sort of Nation of Islam and, what else? Sort of Marcus Garvey sort of view of the civil rights struggle, that modern lens was being put on the history of jazz. And I started to question that. And then when I came on here and started to make silly videos about music, talking about all that stuff, and I would think, well, I'm going to do a video on the history of jazz. And even in my early videos, if you go back, I will be saying things like, jazz was created by Black Americans in New Orleans, blah, blah. I'm saying that. Why am I saying that? Because that was the established narrative. But even when I was saying that, if I erred from the mainstream establishment narrative in any shape or form, I start to get pushback. And in getting pushback, I actually start to go back to the source material and study it even more. And the source material started to move me away from that more and more. To the point was I was going, where is the genesis of jazz? Where does it happen? You know, when you're trying to find like the source of the Nile and you're searching around and you find this little spring of water that's popping out. You go, that's the source of the Nile. Where's the genesis point of jazz? Where is it? Because I can't find it. There's all sorts of musicians from all sorts of different cultures working on in New Orleans, all inputting into this music form that suddenly pops out of New Orleans and that surrounding area. Jazz, it just emerges. And it's a fact that people of all sorts of different cultures, all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds were working on the project of jazz. Okay? But then on top of that, when you really start to study, you start to realize the history isn't how it's been explained, that people who were fighting against the racism that were against, say, Jim Crow that was brought in 1895, the black people that were fighting against that were, how can I put it, whiter than me.
Historically, Creole referred to people born in Louisiana during the colonial period who spoke French, Spanish, and/or Creole language and practiced the Roman Catholic faith regardless of their ethnicity. Today, as in the past, Creole goes beyond racial boundaries. It connects people to their colonial roots, be they descendants of European colonialists, enslaved free Africans, or to those of mixed heritage. Many define Creole through foodways, through music, through folklore, through family traditions, through architecture, or the Catholic faith, and often through genealogy. The word is not a racial label. People of European, African, and mixed ancestry can and have been identified as Louisiana Creoles since the 18th century. After the Louisiana Purchase, the term Creole took on a more political meaning and identity, especially for those people of Latinate culture. The Catholic Latin Creole culture in Louisiana contrasted greatly with the Anglo-Protestant culture there of the Yankee Americans. New Orleans in particular has retained a significant historical population of Creoles of colour, a group mostly consisting of free persons of multiracial European, African and Native American descent. As Creoles of colour had received superior rights and education with Spain and France than their black American counterparts, many of the United States' earliest writers, poets and civil activists were Creole. This includes Victor Salois, Rodolphe Desdunes and of course the aforementioned Homer Plessy.
Whereas Homer Plessy, the guy that brought the court case to try and overthrow Jim Crow and failed, was 1/8 black.
Congressional Reconstruction officially ended in 1877 with the election of the Democrat Rutherford B. Hayes. The first action by the state of Louisiana to legislate segregation occurred in 1890. It was then that the state passed a law requiring separate accommodations for black and white patrons on rail cars. This law set in motion the rule of Jim Crow by prompting the seminal lawsuit of Homer Plessy versus Ferguson. This was a landmark US Supreme Court decision ruling that racial segregation laws did not violate the US Constitution as long as the facilities for each race were equal in quality, a doctrine that became known as separate but equal. Homer Plessy was a light-skinned man. In fact, he was 1/8 African descent, but he was still classed as black. When we look at the history of jazz and we look at people assigned as black or Creole or white, it is far more complex than it seems. Someone that was 1/8 black was classed as black. So when Homer Plessy decided to board a white rail car in 1892, he did this in direct defiance of the law. With the government changing from Republican to Democrat, Creoles also lost political power and Jim Crow was enforced, creating even more segregation. This forced certain groups that had seen themselves as separate together and also forced other groups apart.
And then I started to realise that the very definition of what black is and was different back then. And then something that had worried me since I was a kid, which was when I looked at those photographs of the old black bands in New Orleans, like the one photograph we had at Buddy Bolden's band. As a kid, I used to think, well, that bloke's not black there. Sat in the front row. Is he Mexican or something? But he doesn't look like a black person. I think if I met him, I wouldn't say he was black. Yet they're saying he's black. Are they just saying he's black because he's got a tan? You know? What was his name? Robbie Cho. I can't remember his first name. He had a band that D.D. Chandler played drums in. Was it John Robbie Cho? There's a famous photograph way earlier than Buddy Bolden. This is like 1896, 97. And there's a couple of blokes in there. Who are they? Who are these people? So all I have been doing is asking those questions, right? Because to me, the idea that there was an esoteric group of black people in New Orleans and then they invented jazz and then white people came in and stole it from them and then because of the racism of the times, they made more out of it and gave it the name jazz, that doesn't add up to me. Now, I promise you, okay, I have no interest in trying to prove one or the other. I'm just saying what I see. But no one has been able to challenge that yet. And I have got to say with my debate with True Saviour, when I brought all this up, he then just jumped back into saying, no, none of that matters. What we're talking about is black culture. It's just about culture. There is a thing called black culture, and jazz is a part of black culture.
And of course, the argument for Jim Crow was separate but equal. I don't agree with separate but equal. I don't think it's right. Not in America. I think you have to aim at unity, and I believe jazz represents unity because it was created by all Americans. Now, that's upsetting to you because I seem to be downplaying the black, the black part of jazz.
Now, because you're not looking at culture, and that's why it's important. Let me give you an example. Now, could you tell me what is the Creole and the European musical contributions to the creation of jazz? Like, for example, if I say that it's well established, now this is not me talking, that ragtime and the blues and spiritual music is foundational to jazz. Without those elements, there is no jazz. So what I'm asking you to do is tell me what are the musical elements of the European and this right, the Creole categorization is kills me because it's not a race or nothing like that. But
Creole is not a racial category.
You make it like it's a separate thing. So
no, I'm not. I think this is a confusion. Okay. I am saying that these were the categories. These are the idiotic categories upon which Jim Crow was based. So in New Orleans, you had white people who were classified as black. They can't vote, blah, blah. Now, they come out their front door and they go mix with the white people because nobody knows. They might have said culture, but in the end, it was how brown you were, unless they start to look at certificates. So they had the one drop rule, one drop of black genes in there, and you're black. Now, I don't think that's right. And so there were white people in those bands. It was mixed up. And all these influences coming in.
In what bands?
In the black bands. They were what bands?
What bands in particular are you talking about?
Excelsior band. You can see them in the photographs.
You could then say, well, if everyone's contributing, what makes it black culture? Now, do you think I'm going to sit here and say there isn't black American culture? I'm not. And I think there is. But I think that if you approach it with a more intelligent thought process, a more questioning, and try and get away from the identity politics and deal with what actually is the case, you will find that there is a much stronger argument for what black Americans did for this music. And I feel this project I'm on, from my point of view, and I might be wrong, and I know I'm British, and I know I'm white, and I know all that racism is going to come my way from people saying you shouldn't be talking about this isn't your culture. You've got to understand, I don't accept that worldview because I don't accept identity politics. I just don't accept it. I don't believe there's a white supremacy. I don't believe there's systemic racism. I think they're nonsense terms. There is racism and it's horrendous. But the systemic racism, there's no ghost in the machine being racist. It's people who are racist. Organisations can be racist, but it will have to be in legislature. If it's not in their legislature, then it doesn't exist. It's the people being racist. And so you have to bring it down to the individual. And you have to say, yeah, that white person might not be racist and that white person might be racist. And then you have to try and tackle the white guy who's racist. Now, how do you beat racism? Well, we know how to beat racism.
People always say to me, Daryl, how can you have this stuff? Why don't you burn it? As shameful as it is, you don't burn our history, regardless the good, the bad, the ugly. And the Ku Klux Klan is as American as baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet. Hey, Frank, how you doing, man? Hey, Gary.
Nice to meet you.
My pleasure.
Here's my great Titan robe. You want me to put it on?
Yeah.
We've got members as young as 18, and we also have junior Klan members.
We would fight to the last bullet for our people.
Okay, so what can we all do together as a nation?
Help save the white race.
How can you hate me when you don't even know me? Look at me and tell me to my face why you would lynch me.
This country's been through a lot.
It still has a long ways to go.
An awful long way, as news will tell you.
I'm mad. We should all be mad.
We have a society that has determined that we should fear the black man.
Give that person a platform. Allow them to air their views, and people will reciprocate. I never set out to convert anybody. In my quest, some of them ended up converting themselves.
This is somebody I can relate to.
You get that white guy and you bring something familiar within a black person, not black culture, but an individual black person. As soon as he feels some love and response between those two people, that's the thing that beats racism. I was told the other day a very interesting story about this guy that was a white supremacist Ku Klux Klan, and he hated all black people, and somebody attempted to try and rid him of his racism. So they brought a black person to chat with this guy, and they found out that his favourite football team or baseball team, whatever it was. He put this hat on the black guy. So as soon as the black guy walks in, the guy goes, "Oh, you got a hat? I love that team." They start talking. Within an hour, he's going, "No, this guy's a good guy. I like him. He's my friend." Right? That's how you beat racism. Now, I have to sit taking the shit that I take from the outside world for believing that that's the only way to beat racism, is for us all to come together. But some people don't want to come together, do they? The Ku Klux Klan, for example, they don't want to come together. They want to box themselves off, don't they? They want to separate themselves off from everything else. That is racism.
As a follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, one of the things that he talked about, what the Muslims want, or what Black people want in particular, is to have a piece of our own land, maybe about 8 states. And the government would provide the funding and the financial resource and the minerals and the fertile land for us. Now, it could be here in the United States, or it could be, somewhere internationally overseas. This is not a new concept. When we look at what Marcus Garvey did, when we look at what Noble Drew Ali was attempting to do before the United States government came in and halted what Black America was trying to accomplish.
Well, whether people think that separation is a pipe dream or not, it is on the tip of the tongues of many Black people in America today.
That is the system of racism right there. Now, for me, I have taken so much shit because of what I've said about the history of jazz, to the point where it has made me ill at times. I've lay in bed thinking, am I doing the right thing? Why should I even get involved with this? It's not my fight. Why would you go online and say this for? It doesn't get the views because these videos don't get the views. It's not clickbaity. I try and make it clickbaity, but it's a fascinating discussion. On my channel, we talk about 20th century popular music forms, including jazz, blues, funk, soul, reggae, whatever, progressive rock, whatever we talk about. It has its roots in that bloody Genesis as something that, what popped out, the source of jazz that emerged in New Orleans. If you understand that, you can understand the special thing that exists in jazz, right? And so I want to understand it. But I can't understand it. I have to accept something that doesn't make sense. Now, you would say, Andy, all you got to do is sit and talk to people and they'll explain it to you, because you just don't know enough. You in your white, British little middle class enclave, you have no right to even read the books and accept them. Don't question it whatsoever. Well, when people try and say that to me, I don't like it at all. We should all be questioning everything that comes our way. We should be allowed to think, we should be allowed to feel, and we should be allowed to come to our own conclusions. That's called freedom. It's what we all want. It's what makes people happy. It's what Black people who that's what they were fighting for, and that's what Homer Plessy got on that bloody railway carriage for. Was get the right to be able to go, I'm going to sit on this carriage and you ain't going to tell me where to sit. You're not going to tell me what to do, where to go. I'm a free person with the same set of rights as you. And within that set of rights, I want to be able to think and act exactly the same as you. All right? So I'm not going to accept someone saying you've got no right to talk about it because it's totalitarianism. And I feel strongly about that. The conversation I had with Truth Savior, even though we were so opposed, Truth Savior did not approach me with that sort of manner. We had what I thought was a heated conversation, but we approached it as friends at the beginning, and I think we left as friends. I'm sure there's things he said I didn't agree with, and we could probably argue till the cows come home. But the positive thing of that, because he approached me in that way, I did shift my opinion. And I've done a video where I've shifted my opinion, but since then, my opinion has advanced some more. And I'm starting to build, for me, something that does account for and celebrate the creative genius of Black American culture. I'm trying to pick my words as correctly as I can here. Now, if you want to boil it down to the core of these ideas that I don't quite agree with, it's come out of this movement in jazz called BAM. And the idea is that we don't call jazz anymore. We call it BAM, Black American Music. Well, I don't think that's a good thing at all. I mean, even it just doesn't make sense to me. Right? It doesn't make sense to me on 100 different levels. Plus, someone telling me that I should use a word. It's the word shoulds. You know, shoulds and oughts. Has anyone read Hume? Or are they going to write Hume off as a racist? That's what they will do. Should. No one's going to tell me what I should say. I want to call it jazz. I'm going to call it jazz. No one's going to change me from that. What are you going to do? How are you going to stop me from saying it? So you can sit there thinking, well, I'm going to say, yeah, of course you can. I will celebrate and fight for your right to call jazz BAM. And when somebody says, what do you play? And I go, I play BAM. And they go, what's that then? And you have to go jazz. I will go, no, when he says BAM, he means jazz. That's what he means when he says that he's changed the word, right? But it isn't just the fact that you've changed the word. It's the fact that you've got a whole bunch of political ideology for the reason for that change, haven't we? We've got a whole point. The fact that jazz is American music, but so is a whole bunch of other music forms, like the blues, for example, like country music, like gospel, right? Like funk, you know, like rock and roll. They are all American music, okay? And then we get onto the black label. Right, now I've said this and everyone's going, oh, and I'm trying not to explain the fact that on one level, I don't believe any music is a colour. On two, I don't believe that any person can celebrate their culture in a way which elevates their culture above any other cultures. All the cultures should be celebrated in an equal amount, right? So I wouldn't feel comfortable celebrating my white European culture. I wouldn't feel confident saying that, you know, I feel proud of what Einstein did when he came up with the theory of relativity. It was bloody clever for a white man to do such a thing. Because, of course, they will say, yeah, but Andy, it's not because of that. You understand there has been a racial inequity and you're trying to rebalance that. I know all about it. I've studied that idea of anti-racism and trying to, you know, put weights in culture that will rebalance. I don't agree with it. Do you understand? I don't think it works. I just think it makes the world more racist. And as those ideas have come into our society, it seems that the world is getting more racist. And the divisions are being pulled apart because, of course, that's not how you solve racism. You solve racism with the baseball hat with your favourite team on, and you share the love and you bring people back together. But sometimes I don't think these people are really interested in coming back together, are they? You know, it's like talking to a Ku Klux Klan guy. They want to live in a society where it's just for white people. Because you've got to understand that's the original meaning of white supremacy. Now white supremacy means something else. It's equivalent to like a Jewish supremacy. It's the idea that there is this, that the white people have almost like they're a bad force in the world. Now, of course, with the idea of the Jewish supremacy, it ended up with the Jews being pushed into, you know, gas chambers, and it's still having an effect now. All those ideas are bad ideas. And if you took the idea of the white supremacy to its natural, logical end, you would have to put white people into the gas chambers as well, because they stand there being white. And with your systemic racism and your inherent white supremacies, they can't get rid of this. We can't get rid of this. We're stained in the same way as white Europeans stained black people with the category of slave.
Dudes too.
Hey, Dad.
Just because they... Yes, Junior.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1984.
1984?
Yes, sir. Some of the best years in life. So you gotta get up there. You can't be scared to play with these dudes or nothing like that.
How is it being a slave?
When we come to this idea of black American music, right, there's one guy that I would love to talk to about this. I would love to talk to the guy is the guy that came up with the idea, and he is a New Orleans-based trumpeter called Nicholas Payton. Now, the other day, Nicholas Payton cropped up on my feed. Now, I have no idea whether this is a guy that wants to have a conversation with me, and he's quite apt to go, Andy, I think you've got it wrong here, and this is what I think. And, and I've got a reasonable platform. This is being watched by millions of people. And if Nicholas Payton, who really is the guy that came up with this idea, if he comes on here and explains it to me, and he comes from New Orleans, and he comes from a jazz family. His dad was a famous New Orleans musician. So he might be able to tell me, no, this is how it happened. And I promise you, as I have adjusted my opinion, I would adjust my opinion. And then with that research, I will present a video. So anybody watching my channel would have gone, Andy's really pushed into this. But actually, he came to the conclusion that black people created jazz in New Orleans. In the end, he put it through every single thing, and he challenged it and questioned it. But then Nicholas Payton came on, explained it to him. And he went, oh yeah, I see that. I totally accept that. I get that. When I spoke to Truth Saviour, a couple of the things he said, I went away and thought, yeah, I do have to, even though I'm a bit of a liberal, sort of enlightenment liberal, I sort of focus on the individual and the rights of the individual, and I don't like group identity politics whatsoever. But we have to accept that there's this thing of, black American culture, even though I can't quite understand what it is. Is it the same culture for everybody, or did it shift around? And what is it? And what's at the fringe of this culture? Is it black and then it just stops? Or is it like you can push the edge of that culture and go into sort of, Italian culture? Or, how does it work, this culture thing? I don't accept it. Sorry, I find that really difficult. It's a word for something so spongy that we can't really build anything on the idea of a culture linked to a race. We can't do it. But I could put that aside. And I have done. And I've thought maybe with all that I know, I could come up with an argument for black American music, this thing that Nicholas Payton has said. Maybe I could come up from a point of view of me who's against it, an argument that actually steelmans Nicholas Payton's position. And maybe that idea of sharing, that you could get to a point where you'd go, oh yeah, Andy Edwards, he doesn't really agree with all of this. That's his thing, that's up to him. But he has said this, this, and this. And so you get two circles of belief, because you've got to remember beliefs and truths as two separate things. And wisdom is not the same as knowledge, because so much of this is moral in its root. And anyone who's watched my channel will know I don't believe that morality comes from an organised religion's version of what that morality is. And I don't believe in a sort of relativist, postmodernist idea of morals. I believe that morals come from aesthetics. And if you believe in a God, it is through aesthetics that God works to give us our morality. And if you don't believe in a God, then it is the universe that does that. Because what artists do is they reveal something about the universe. And in doing that, that is the communion that goes on when somebody creates. Is what I'm trying to do right now. As I'm in the moment talking, I'm not writing an essay here, okay? I'm sitting down in front of you and I've got the visual image of me being in this room. I'm talking to you. I've lit it. I've positioned myself in a certain place. And as I'm talking, certain pictures are coming up. And all sorts of things might come in to alter the aesthetic aspect of this video. And all of that, not just the facts I've said, and separate to that, the logic that I've tried to apply, the arguments, the appeals to emotion, the appeals to being sympathetic and empathetic. That's not a factual statement when I say that. That's an aesthetic statement. It's something that we like. That's something that we would want, that we're attracted to. And with aesthetics, we can also point things out that we go, no, we don't want that. That's about, you have been able to show me the bad thing I don't like. And this is what musicians do. This is what artists do. And this is what jazz musicians did. And jazz musicians did it in a way which was so new and novel And the way it integrated with recorded music was profound in terms of popular music in the 20th century. I know that, and I think that's an interesting conversation to have. And there's an aspect that underpins why jazz could do that, which I'm going to bring in at the end of this talk. So, Nicholas Payton cropped up on my Facebook. I thought I would love to talk to him. He will either approach me, and as soon as I even broach the subject, as soon as I don't agree with him, as I don't think jazz is black music, he may say, well, that's a racist comment and I don't like what you're saying. You know, he might come in with that. And if he's got that attitude, then for me, I've proved my point, haven't I? I've proved my point, because this isn't about what is true. It's about a political opinion, and it's about an emotional characteristic attached to that. But I don't know this Nicholas Payton, do I? So I make friends, he accepts my friend request. And then in my feed, this pops up. Somebody had said to Nicholas Payton, Chick, and I assume that means Chick Corea, Chick always sounds very Bud Powell to me. I don't think that's Chick Webb, because... do I agree with that? Not really. I don't think Bud Powell's a major influence, but Bud Powell's one of these... Bud Powell is the supreme bebop pianist. And so anybody post-bebop will have a little bit of Bud Powell in their playing, in the same way that they'll have a little bit of Thelonious Monk. Nicholas Payton comes in and says, Chick love Bud, but coming out of McCoy way more. It's basically the same shapes. He just changed McCoy's intervallic relationship from fourths and pentatonics to minor thirds and half steps. Trust me, I've studied this intensely. The DNA is there. Right, now, for me, okay, this guy said this. He's come in and said, oh, it's coming from McCoy Tyner. Now, McCoy Tyner, one of the big things he did as a musician was, rather than having triadic-based harmony, in other words, harmonies based upon thirds, he started to use fourths. Now, fourths are interesting, because when you stack fourths, if you start stacking fourths, you are starting to move around the cycle of fifths backwards. When you move around the cycle of fifths, you are moving backwards. Now, the cycle of fifths shows you how cadences work. Cadences work. If you were looking at the clock of the cycle of fifths is a clock, the cadences are coming anti-clockwise at you, right? And that they fall towards you. And that's why cadences sound very like you've dropped down and resolved into something. When you move the opposite way, and there is a cadence system that's not used so much in jazz, Jacob Collier's talked about this no end, where you could have cadences rising up. And if you are building your harmony on fourths, it suggests that when you play that, especially if you move in fourths. So you can take a scale that you're in, and rather than playing the triad that is voicing that harmony at that point, you play the fourth, and those four notes are coming from the thing, but it's suggesting something else. And also the role of major and minor starts to diminish, right? Sorry, I shouldn't use the word, starts to get pushed down. You haven't got that so much. But also you can then start to stack fourths, and you can logically stack fourths and move out and back into the key. So imagine you've got Coltrane playing, and he's trying to bust open these, triadic 2-5-1s. He's trying to bust them out from inside. He's got this matrix going on. And then behind that, McCoy Tyner comes in and he hits a great big fourth chord, bang, like this. And now you're suggesting all the keys at once. That was McCoy's revelation. That's what he did. So when I read this, I thought, well, fair enough, but if he's just taken that and then put it back to minor thirds and pentatonics, right? Now, you can build harmony up from pentatonics. And if you build harmony up from pentatonics, you will get fourths. So I thought, this doesn't... He said he studied it intensely. Well, so have I. He knows way more than me. He's a much greater jazz musician than I am. Maybe I don't know anything. I'm a bloody drummer, and I'm a rock and roll drummer at that. But none of this seemed to make sense, And I thought, I'll get involved and I'll come in, because I have a reasonable knowledge of jazz. This is why I have the YouTube channel. I know about the history of it, and I can pull that from that history at a level which is pretty heavy. I knew that. So I thought I'll drop in a fact that Nicholas Payton might find interesting, He might know it, he might not know it, and I put this. In terms of phrasing, melodic lines, right, because in terms of chords, everybody bloody copied McCoy Tyner. Chick was greatly influenced by Blue Mitchell. Now, Blue Mitchell is a trumpet player that Chick especially liked, and Chick would transcribe Blue Mitchell's trumpet solos. But what's really interesting, he would learn to play them, not on piano, but trumpet. Now, when I had an interview with a Chick Corea, I read an interview where he said this, I thought that gave you a much greater insight to Chick Corea's approach and how incredible it is, right? In other words, Chick Corea, what he creates on piano is sort of unique, isn't it? It's to just reduce it to influences. It misses the point of what Chick Corea did. Chick Corea is instantly recognizable. He is an innovator. He has worked at an incredibly dense and deep level, but he's also made music that's been incredibly successful and filled stadiums. So we can't just brush him off as saying, oh, this is related to somebody else. And perhaps the fact that he was drawing on a wider template than just other pianists is an interesting thing to say. I then followed up with this comment where his point that he has made about Black American music, I gently pushed against and said that I didn't think that jazz was black or white. I didn't say it was white, and I didn't say it wasn't black. I said I just don't think it has a colour. That's my opinion. Nicholas Payton came back in then with this, quoting me. His style was more complex than just a reharmonisation of McCoy's style. And he said this was a passive-aggressive dig at my comment. Me saying that I thought that Chick Corea's style was probably more than just being a reharmonisation of McCoy's style, which is a complete statement of fact, is aggressive. That's aggression. To say, I don't think it was. I think Chick Corea was more than just reharmonisation, but reharmonising McCoy Tyner. Now, if we lived in a world where that was aggressive, passive-aggressive, how would we operate? And then, of course, my comments that jazz was neither black or white did not go down well. He says that not only was that passive-aggressive, that my comment about jazz not being black or white is a racist comment. He said, as is your racist comment about jazz not being black or white. So there we have it. Bam, right? Bam, in terms of the concept of it, is not a statement of truth, is it? Obviously. It's not a statement of truth. Because if you were to go, I don't think that's the truth, they won't come back and go, it is the truth and here's the evidence. They will go, you're a racist for saying that. Which means that the statement is based upon a political agenda, not whether something's right or wrong. I'm trying to explain this in more detail. If we take Alexander Graham Bell, he invented the telephone. Okay? Now say he was Scottish. So we're now in a situation where the Scottish people go, I'm proud of my Scottish culture. We invented the telephone. We did. What do you mean you did? Me, my people, my Scottish people invented the telephone. And someone says, well, what's your evidence for that? Because I think that there was another guy working on the telephone exactly the same time, and surely he should get some credit, shouldn't he? You're against Scottish people. No, I'm not. I am just saying that there was another guy at the same time that was also. Discount it or prove it. But raising that as a factual statement is not against the Scottish people. It's no criticism of Scottish culture, and it doesn't diminish what Alexander Graham Bell did. It just does not place the unique genesis of the telephone entirely in Alexander Graham Bell, in his innovation, which I don't know much about it. I'm pretty sure he did invent the bloody telephone. And here's an example where you can point at it and say, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. But we can't do this for jazz. it doesn't emerge like that. Most music forms don't emerge like that. And for most music forms, we don't have to go through this ridiculous charade of trying to find the source of the Nile in this history, because we know that it's produced by everybody and it comes out of that situation. So it's a product of the cultural climate in New Orleans between 1880 and 1900, over that 20-year period. It's birthed there. So we don't know who created it now, and we don't. There is no record. We got records of black bands going all the way back to the beginning, and white bands, and now we're back to the same thing. I keep saying it over and over again. And also our definition of black and white was different then than it is now. Okay? So we go around in this circle, don't we? We're in this circle, and they're saying that it is, and they haven't got any proof, but they'll say they've got the proof, that everyone knows it and it's been studied, and they'll come out about spirituals and Congo Square and the American slave experience, and they will talk about all these things. And yet I'm going, yeah, I know, but you're trying to tell me that jazz was created in the biggest cultural melting pot on the planet at that time. But we have to put the fact that it was a cultural melting pot aside, and we have to pick one ethnicity out of that great big melting pot and go, it's all down to them, and everyone else was stealing off them. And when you point to all the things that are not part of the constituents, right? Because of course, within jazz, there is an African American constituent of things, but it's not as wide as what people say, and you have to be more specific. When people go, the use of pentatonic scales, minor third, all these type of things, syncopation, swing, all these things, they all exist in other music forms. Now that doesn't mean that when we hear jazz swing that it is, of course it's different to that, and when we listen to the improvisation of, say, Eastern European wedding bands, that sounds very similar to jazz, but it's sort of different, isn't it? So we know there's something different there, right? But it's more complex, and I cannot accept just someone pointing to those things and then all the other stuff that comes from elsewhere just discounting it.
And I want to make also the observation that the word plantation was the English system, how they dealt with the Irish. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that the English had a plantation system to exploit the labor of the Irish. It came to America, it was called plantations. And when people in the 19th century heard the spirituals, they said they sound just like Irish folk songs. So it's important to understand that the root of Afro-American music and the root of all American music is Anglo-Celtic music. The harmonic roots and the folk songs, the use of the sixth, and all the things that we're going to hear in Motherless Childhood that J. Bad is going to play, that has its, as a matter of fact, St. James Infirmary, which is a New Orleans song, was originally an Irish song.
Right. You don't understand the experience, the slave experience, and the creation of the spiritual. The spirituals in 1865, they had come entirely out of the black American experience, and they fed into jazz. They did. Because I'm not so arrogant to say discount it all. A lot of the things that people point to and say that's black music there, that's black music, they are talking about things that were created through minstrelsy.
The most popular entertainment form in the 19th century were the minstrel shows. The minstrel shows were a parody of what white people thought was African American culture. It was racist and it was prejudiced, but it was extremely popular, and it developed a whole raft of songs and performance approaches that influenced jazz. Another influence on jazz were the spasm bands that emerged in New Orleans around about 1890. These bands were often young kids, street urchins, who would create their own instruments and play their own music. They couldn't read music, and so they aped the marching bands that were such a success at the time in New Orleans. We also have the practice of the cakewalk. Pre-1865, the slave owners would tell the slaves to perform, to play some music and to do some dancing. And the slaves would parody the white elite that were telling them what to do by parading around in a style known as cakewalk. And this, I believe, also played a huge part in the swagger and syncopation that we hear in jazz.
Now, minstrelsy, again, is not a product of white people, and it's not a product of black people. It was created by white people, and we know that. The Nile, source of minstrelsy, we know where it comes back, goes back to 1824, with the creation of Jim Crow and that comedic character. And this was a great, successful thing. People loved it. It was massively entertaining. And then white and black performers came in. Now, there is an aspect of minstrelsy which comes from the cakewalk, and the cakewalk is a thing that comes from the African American experience. I am not denying any of this. I just will not accept and get into this sort of almost like separatist idea that we are going to treat certain influences as being like golden and wonderful and other influences just being influences, because then we're getting into some sort of elitist racial thing, which sounds to me like bloody fascism. Anyway, it seems that this cannot be questioned. You cannot question it in the way I'm questioning it, Nicholas Payton says, I don't know who you are, but you can get the fuck off my page. Now, that's not passive-aggressive. That's aggressive. That's aggressive. I would never talk to anybody like that unless they talk to me like that. And I wish he'd come and say it to my face. What sort of person, someone they don't know, just says that to someone because they've said, I don't think jazz is black or white. And I don't think because, why are we getting this? Now, the reason I've done this video is that so often I'm arguing with people about it, and the snottiness and elitism that exists in jazz, they don't really want to engage with it. So they go, well, where is it? It doesn't exist, Andy. Doesn't exist, Andy. Well, this is what I'm on about here. And this don't play a major problem to me. It doesn't bother me the slightest. It's a shame it's Nicholas Payton doing it, because I actually thought there would be more to this than that reaction. Because as soon as I see that reaction, I know. And then he said, you friend requested me as I've friend requested hardly anyone. So what he's saying here is that I went and made friends with him. So I made friends with him and then I've been passive aggressive. No, I haven't. I have just said a comment. The argument, that doesn't affect it. The argument is whether I've been aggressive. Yeah, I've challenged his view. Totally challenged his view. I've come in and I've challenged his view. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it because I want to put down black people and I want to put down what they've done and what black people are able to do. I don't want to do that at all. In fact, I have an idea that that identity politics, to turn jazz into something where the excellence and achievement of it has been diminished immensely. And I think the change in someone like Wynton Marsalis to go in sort of a more like omni-American view of jazz history, of seeing it as being American music first, is the realization that this diminishes the genius of jazz. When Sonny Rollins said, and I'll try and get the quote up here now, when Sonny Rollins basically said that jazz is not black music, right? I know why he was saying that. The reason I was saying that is because that brings down what people think this is. Right? Now, he then says, be respectful or you will be blocked. I wish he would block me, because I've got to be honest, for my own mental health, if that's what we're dealing with, I'd rather just walk away from it. And the arrogance to assume, which I know there's a pecking order here. There always is a pecking order. How dare you come and talk to me, Nicholas Payton? Me, Nicholas Payton, how dare you talk to me? I come from a family of musicians that goes back through New Orleans. He was playing in bands when he was 4 years old. He had a record contracted with Verve by the time he was in his early 20s. And he played with everyone from Elvin Jones to bloody Ron Carter to everybody. Yeah, you know why? Because you had the privilege of growing up in the family you're in the town you're in, with the contacts you've got. That doesn't mean you were privileged in everything. It doesn't mean you haven't experienced horrible racism. I'm sure you have. But in the terms of jazz, you have a privilege to access this way more than I ever did. All right? And this discounts an aspect of jazz. Now, this is going to be a long video. It's a big talk. I'll try my best to get through these points. Which one should I go for next? There's two things I want to explain here. Jazz is an incredible music form because of the fact it is malleable on the spot and it can adapt. That adaptation started happening as soon as it was recorded. Before it was recorded, I believe it was quite an archaic form, street music, marching music. But the reason why it was malleable was because a very strange thing had happened in New Orleans. Creole musicians had become highly trained classical musicians. They'd taken in all that knowledge and theory and technique from European music. And then that was forced, when Jim Crow came in, into these sort of head arrangements, field marching bands. Now, those head arrangement field marching bands, there was as many white versions of those as there were black ones. One of the first ones I can track back to in terms of these sort of head arrangements, make your own instruments, busking on the streets, can't read music, would be the Razzie Dazzie Spasm band. People like James Europe that were running black bands, he wasn't from New Orleans, but they were playing various sophisticated sort of marching and stroke cocktail music, and take on the influence of jazz in much the same way as the original Dixieland Jazz Band get accused of, even though the lineage of the original Dixieland Jazz Band goes right back to the beginnings of jazz. And when that was recorded in 1917, it's as archaic as you could. It sounds nothing like Jelly Roll Morton or Louis Armstrong, and yet Louis Armstrong was stating in the 1930s that this was the most advanced and sophisticated band in New Orleans. So when you start to try and go through all of this, you realise that the magic happens and the genius emerges when it's recorded. As soon as jazz was recorded, it starts to go like a virus and it just communicates this genius. And the geniuses are found. Now, those geniuses tend to be black. They're not all black. You've got Jelly Roll Morton, who's a Creole, who is as much white as he is black. He would have been classed as black at the time. He may have thought of himself as being in a different bracket to the black musicians in New Orleans. I'm not saying he's white, but you have Creole musicians. You had musicians like Papa Jack Lane and Nick LaRocca and all the musicians that we're supposed to disregard, and geniuses like Bix Beiderbecke emerging out of the 1920s experience that I'm talking. But they're predominantly black. Now, there's a reason for this black genius that we see, and this is definitely the case, and this needs to be celebrated. There is, because of the racism, because of the slave experience and then Jim Crow and all the stuff that had happened, that genius is untapped, but it doesn't emerge until you start to record it. So as you start to record it and people start to go, because what Louis Armstrong does, if you want to know why he's the absolute genius, is because he created the Hot Fives and then the Hot Sevens. These weren't his working bands. These bands were designed to go into the studio, and then he crafted genius that would exist in the side of a 78 record in the time span and with the recording technology that he had at the time. And with that, he invents every aspect of popular music, right down to modern drill and drum and bass and thrash metal. Everything's in what Louis Armstrong did. He was the absolute genius. He came from the streets, from the gutter, and this came through because jazz allowed this new type of genius. There was musical genius all the time. There's always musical geniuses, but not like Louis Armstrong. And what he came through and did was incredible. Jelly Roll Morton did to a certain extent. Jelly Roll Morton did. There's a whole bunch of geniuses that suddenly come through. As an improviser, I would say Sidney Bechet was the first musician really to go, when you're just fiddling around, you guys who can't read music, so you're just creating this top line off the top of your head. You could do that at a genius level. You see, this is the point. So we need to celebrate this idea of jazz in its structure finding genius and bringing it out. Now, jazz was first recorded in 1917. Recordings start to really come out as a common thing about 1920. In my country, by 1925, it's here, and there's a whole jazz scene. It's spread that much. And when British jazz musicians heard it back in 1925, and this history has been completely ignored because it doesn't fit in the grand narrative, it produced geniuses. It produced genius after genius. And when we start to get to the back end of jazz history and look at the true geniuses that emerged in the last 40 years, I would posit John McLaughlin or Alan Holdsworth, two musicians that will get, totally ignored by mainstream jazz history. That comes out of that line. Django Reinhardt and the whole hot club of France, because the French celebrated jazz and saw it as an intellectual form. That is why jazz is wonderful. It's the form. Now you can say, yeah, but you don't understand it. The form was created by black people. Well, we haven't been able to prove that yet, have we? Right? We've not actually been able to prove that's the case. So, what is it? That's it. Why do we feel? Because I feel it's black music. Even though I say all this, I'm looking for it. Now, I've said this before. There's an album by Rassan Roland Kirk, and it's called Blackness. And it celebrates the idea of blackness. Now, I think there is a thing in music called blackness. And I think I know what it is. And when somebody plays and they start to play in a certain way, it's a whole bunch of things you can't really put your finger on. So the sophistication of a Sonny Rollins improvisation and all that stuff, that you hear that in Bach, you hear that in Mozart. It's like this profound thing that music has. That's not the black aspect of jazz. The black aspect of jazz is something that's deeper down. It's like a soul thing. Now, Sonny Rollins has that as well, right? But also white musicians have it. This idea of soul or groove or funk or feel, whatever. I was watching Freddie King last night and he was playing this he was incredible. He got about 4 notes going on. That's all he's doing. Incredible. And I thought, that's black music. That's black music. Black people, that belongs to black people. Blackness and the idea of black music, that's their cultural thing. But everybody can have it. And some black people haven't got it. In fact, most black people haven't got it. Right? Certain people have it. And it's a love. It's like the baseball hat. It's a love that you have. I've got it. Right? Many years ago, I went out to Indianapolis and there was some jazz guy playing in a local club. It was a big club and he was a well-known guy. I don't know who he was, but he was pretty well-known because he had about 200 people in there watching him. I get taken down there. As I come in, they're going, this is Andy Edwards from the UK. He's played with Robert Plant. Oh my God, he's played with Robert Plant. So somebody decides to go up to the drummer and says, can this guy, Andy Edwards, sit in? And he goes, yeah, sure. So I saw him. He goes up to the main sax guy and says, and the bloke's going, no, I don't want him up. We're here to do a gig. And I understand it. You don't want you're doing a gig as 200 people. You don't want some sitting in, do you? But the people in there and the people who I knew the people who owned the club because of connections through music. And I'll go, no, it's all right, it's all right. So this guy agrees for me to sit on one tune. He says, beginning the second set. Second set comes up. I get on stage and I see he won't look at me. He's like this, right? This is what I love about jazz. He won't look at me and he just calls a tune out the real book. Just says the number like this. So we all flick through the real book. I've got one down there. Bloody Night in Tunisia. I went, oh my God, he's called Night in Tunisia. I thought I could just swing through something and get off here. And then he goes, 1, 2, 3. And they hit it, it's so fast, and I'm going, I'm doing this, and I really felt like I was like the situation had elevated my abilities. I was running and thinking, I'm keeping up, I'm doing all right. And then they gave me a drum solo, and I've got a ton of chops, you see, that's one thing I have got. So I'm doing all that, And the guy looks round at me when it finishes and smiles, gives me a wink or a nod. And then I do the next tune. I did the whole of the second set. And the guy came up and drummers. Now, the reason is that I thought, I'm a bloody white middle-class British guy from Britain. That's why I'm British. And I thought I could turn up in this place and I sit down and play. And I'm not saying I was the best jazz drummer in the world, but I cut it. I could tell I cut it. And I felt proud. Now, I'm not in the same bloody league as Nicholas Payton as a jazz musician. I'm something else. I'm really a progressive rock musician, anybody who looks who I am. But I love jazz. And that thing, the thing I was trying to get is that thing, it's a soul and a feel, and you have to hit it. And I've had this experience with other like funk players when you start playing a backbeat and they turn around and go, you've got that backbeat, or you've got that, you've got this. Now, I've also had people, to be fair, you know, people have messaged me on here saying, yes, I've seen you play jazz and you can't swing. And I'm thinking, yeah, but people said I can swing. So why is this guy saying I can't swing? And then you feel, well, they're using this as a way to batter you down. It's all about the pecking order. So I think there is this idea of soul or blackness and feel and groove, and that is what black people brought to the table. I'm just adding this bit on the end. I've decided to scrap the original ending and just put this on because it was in my mind and then I chickened out and I didn't want to say it. And I am going to say it because I'll put my money where my mouth is. Sometimes I have the feeling when I get into these conversations, the real thing here with this is to deny Chick's genius. It's to say Chick's just a product of McCoy Tyner. That's where the actual genius is. And this happens over and over again. So that is why nobody's mentioning the biggest influence piano-wise on Chick, which would be Bill Evans. This is, I hate to say it's racist. And so this whole discussion comes down to one idea. Either anybody can be racist, black people can be racist to white people can be racist to black people, and racism is basically making a judgment about someone, an individual like me or you or whoever, based upon their race. Quite simple. You know, that you make a decision about that based upon their race. That's what racism is. Or you believe that there's some sort of postmodernist, neo-Marxist identity politic where you've got these great big Hegelian forces and they control society, and there's the supremacy at the top of the elites, and at the bottom, you know, and all the ones at the top are bad and all the ones at the bottom are good, and that's the way it works, and there's a fight between them, and you have to become conscious of it through some sort of identity consciousness, and once you're part of that group and you've been, you know, then you stick to that and it can't be questioned. If somebody comes along and questions it, you strike them down like the heretic that they are. Send them away, out of the group, send them away, and once we've got them all away from us, we can create our own separated community where everyone thinks the same, and there's no disrespect. It's just about respect and power, not about love, respect and power. And once we've got rid of everyone that disagrees with us, we can sit here in a wonderful utopia where everybody thinks the same. See, that's why I didn't want to say that. That's why I didn't want to say it. And what I just said then is bloody obvious to me. It's so obvious, right? And the reason I get annoyed is because this is obvious. This is the case that people who think like that anybody telling you shouldn't be thinking a certain way, if you think like that, you are disrespectful, or you're this, or you're that. If somebody wants to sit there thinking Nazi thoughts, right, let them do it. You will not beat them by trying to ban them. You will not beat them by trying to cover it up like a child, going, it's not there, it's not there. You have to sit down and go, you know your beliefs are bad. Why are they bad? Because they're going to end up with people getting killed. Any death cult utopia, whether it's communism, you know, Marxism, Nazism, it always ends up with people being killed in large amounts. Anybody who believes in an ideological, dogmatic view of the world
has to deal with people who don't agree with that. And because they believe their utopia will be enacted by everybody getting on the same page. And this is what class consciousness is in Marxism. Once everyone gets on the same page, this utopia will emerge, but you have to deal with the other people. And then in sort of this leftist identitarian view is this sort of undercurrent of revolution. We've got to stir everything up. There needs to be a revolution. People like Andy Edwards, this is archaic, but they need to go. I wouldn't kill Andy, no. I might put him in prison for the rest of his life. I wouldn't kill him now. I don't think it is. Well, maybe I would. Let's see how it goes, which is exactly how the bloody Holocaust happened. Shoot a few of them, see what happens. Just shoot a few of them. It happened up in Poland. They shot about 800 people, and the Nazis thought there'd be a massive kickback. You know, people in the local area would have noticed that they just marched 800 people off and shot them in the forest, then buried them. They knew it. And what did the people do? Nothing. Well, I can do that again. This is what I'm against. When somebody like Nicholas Payton turns around and goes, that's a racist comment, and when people throw racism around like that, it's just rotten. It's rotten. Sorry. And I've got a platform here, and I've come and said it. And if he wants to do a video about me and say what a bad person I am, he's welcome to do it. Because if we can't have this conversation, even if you have to deal with the aggression of people that are going to swear at you and call you racist, right? Even if we have to deal with that, we have to have the conversation. We've got to have the conversation, all right? I wish Nicholas Payton would say, oh, I probably was in a bad mood that day and I get loads of this. You don't understand what it's like when you've got this idea of BAM and people put it down. I didn't realise you had a more of an intelligent conversation. I will sit down and have a chat to you. As soon as he said that, if he messaged that, I'd go, sorry, yeah, and I will come on here straight away and say that he said that. Because I would love to have the conversation with him. There's no point in arguing about the genesis of jazz. I've tried it. Nobody accepts it. They just go, no, it's not. They don't give you any proof. They just come down and say, no, it's created by black people who knew anything. How do you know? How do you know? Well, it just was. Everyone knows that's the case. You know, Cleopatra was black. You know, it's the same as that. I don't know. If we get this wrong, if we can't deal with this, we're going to end up losing everything that we actually all value. Our freedoms, our comforts, our the incredible luxury in which we live, the ability to spout nonsense like this and there be no comeback, no one putting you in prison, nobody coming in and raping your family, all the things that Western liberal capitalism gives you. If we cannot value that and want to bring in these ancient tribal ideas into society, if our art cannot deal with that because it's been shut down, because it's been totally taken over by this ideology, even though the mainstream don't think it, but the arts do, then we're in trouble. Do I have faith that jazz could save us? I do. That's the thing. I believe that people from different backgrounds can walk into a room and not even speak to each other. But like that bloke who, because I managed to get through Night in Tunisia at 280 BPM or whatever he put me through, because I managed to survive it, then turned around and nodded and went, yeah, you're okay. And I was proud that he thought I was okay.